Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today, I'm very excited to bring to you my anticipated reads for the first quarter of 2023. These are books that are coming out in January, February, and March that I'm really looking forward to. Just a couple weeks ago, I talked about how I've been doing with my anticipated reads for this year, and I'm really pleased with my progress of how well I'm doing with actually reading the books that I say I'm looking forward to. Most of the books on my shelves are backlist. I read a ton of backlist, but it has been fun. This is the third year that I will be taking a glimpse at the books that are coming out and sharing some of them with you. My goal is to not go crazy because there are a lot of great books coming out. I narrow it down to about 10 to 12. I think I have 12 for this first quarter that sound really, really good to me. And it's a mix of genres, a mix of middle grade and adult. This time, for January to March, I have a lot of historical books on here, but I do have a handful of middle grade and just a mystery or two. It's a good list. I'm going to start with the books coming out in January, and I only picked 3 from January. The first one is called The Bandit Queens. Look at what a fun cover this has. This is by Parini Shroff, and I'm sorry if you see me looking to the side. That's where my computer is open with my spreadsheet that I make for for the upcoming releases. This one reminds me, when I was reading the description of The Bandit Queens, it reminded me a lot of Finlay Donovan, just kind of a comedy of errors. In this one, Geeta, her husband has gone missing about 5 years ago. She lives in a village in India and her husband has gone missing. Everybody just kind of assumes that she killed her husband, which she could fight against, but now it's kind of worked in her favor. She has a small shop. Nobody dares to not buy from her, but other women start coming to her to ask for advice or help in how can they get rid of their husbands as well. It seems like it's going to just be really humorous, this mystery of what happened to her husband. The description on NetGalley said it's a razor-sharp debut of humor and heart that readers soon won't forget. I love that. It just sounds like a fun read to me. So I'm looking forward to The Bandit Queens. Then on January, did I say that comes out on January 3rd? I don't know if I said that. Then on January 17th, I have my first middle grade of this list. It's called The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh. And this is going to be a historical middle grade. It has a dual timeline. So a present day timeline is during the pandemic. And a 13-year-old boy is not thrilled when his great-grandmother comes to live with them for the lockdown period. But then he starts to learn about his great-grandma and her life. He finds a really old picture of her from when she was young. And the second timeline is in the 1930s during a famine that happened in the Ukraine, which is not something that I'm that familiar with, that famine. So I'm really looking forward to learning about that. I know that this says that it's based on true events from the life of family members of the author. And it also said that it's great for fans of Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys and Refugee by Alan Gratz, both of which I really loved. So I knew that this had to go on this list. I just feel like it's going to be one that I'm going to absolutely love. And that is The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh. The third one I did not have to request on NetGalley. By the way, all of these that I'm going to mention today, I have requested on NetGalley. Some of them I've already been approved for. Some of them I haven't. My score right now is at 40. My feedback ratio is at 48%. My goal by the end of the year is to get it to 50. I'm not sure that's going to happen, especially now that I've just requested 10 more books from them. Whoops. But I'm very, very close, and so I'm pleased with that. But I did not need to request Exiles by Jane Harper. This one comes out January 31st in the United States. It already came out in Australia. And my dear friend Lee, who is a subscriber and patron, sent this to me. So thank you, Lee. I'm really excited to read this in the springtime. It is set during the spring, and it follows Aaron Falk, who is the same detective that is in The Dry and then also in Force of Nature. So we're following another story with him as the detective. Aaron Falk goes to Southern Australia, to wine country, for a festive occasion. There's this group of people who are welcoming a new addition to the family, kind of a baby shower. But this same group of people, a year ago, a woman left her baby tucked up into his pram and she disappeared into the crowds and nobody knows what happened to her. Aaron starts to suspect the people that are at this baby shower that he's now a part of, and feels like there's something else going on that's not being talked about. And so he starts to kind of unveil these secrets. I really think Jane Harper does a great job at making the setting its own character almost. And so I'm really looking forward to exploring a different part of Australia as we go down to wine country. And I'm really excited to read this in the springtime. I think it will be a really good one. And that comes out here on January 31st. Then we move into February, and I have 6 books from February that are on this list. So the first 3 are all coming out on February 7th. The first one is Codename Sapphire by Pam Jenoff. She is queen of writing World War II historical fiction. I've read 2, I think, by her so far. I have a handful more on my shelves, and she's coming out with a new one called Codename Sapphire on the 7th of February. And this one, Hannah is a young woman who narrowly escapes from Nazi Germany, but then goes back in working with the resistance in hopes of trying to rescue the rest of her family. And then she finds out they are all either scheduled to be on a train or already on a train to Auschwitz. And she has to just decide how far is she willing to go in order to try to save her family. So kind of a typical set in Germany, World War II historical fiction, but I'm here for it. The next one is totally different. It's a contemporary by Amy Myerson called The Love Scribe, and this just sounded so cute. So in this one, we have these 2 friends, and one of them is an author, and she writes a story for her friend to kind of pick up her spirits. Her friend is really frustrated and sad about her love life. I don't know if she had just had a breakup or something along those lines. And so the friend, who's a writer, writes her a story. Well, when the friend reads the story, she soon after falls in love. So she shares the story with another friend who reads it, and the same thing happens. This happens a couple times, and then this girl who is writing the stories starts to write stories for other friends. So she kind of writes stories and people fall in love, but her own love life isn't so great. And so it just sounds like a cute romance, but also a story about friendship and about the power of story and believing in stories. And I just feel like that sounds like a fun read. Also coming out on February 7th is another book by Sadika Johnson, who I just read The Yellow Wife by and absolutely loved, even though it was a hard-hitting book. She's coming out with another one in February called The House of Eve. This one is going to follow the story of 2 women whose lives are going to intersect. The first is in Philadelphia in the 1950s, and we have a young girl, 15 years old. She's on track to be the first person in her family to go to college, but then this kind of clandestine love affair might put a damper on those plans. Then we also follow Eleanor, who lives in the DC area, and she falls in love with her boyfriend at Howard University, and he comes from a very elite Black family, and they're very kind of closed door about who they allow to enter into their family. They're very wealthy and not so thrilled about Eleanor. She's hoping a baby might change their minds if her and their son have a baby. And then these 2 storylines of these women are going to connect. I really loved Sadika Johnson's writing. She really captivated me in Yellow Wife, and I'm just looking forward to another novel by her. On February 14th, we have one that I'm not quite sure about, but I couldn't resist putting it on this list because anything Anne of Green Gables related, I'm just going to add to this list. So on the 14th, we have The Grace of Wild Things. This is by Heather Fawcett, and it's a witchy Anne of Green Gables retelling. What? So we follow young Grace, who is an orphan. She's not really good at anything except magic, and she keeps getting passed over at the orphanage. Other kids keep getting adopted except her. She finally decides to take matters into her own hands. She runs away from the orphanage and decides she's going to stay with this witch who lives in the woods. But this witch in the woods is notoriously not great. She steals people's souls and stuff. So Grace convinces her. She sets up this plan where if Grace can memorize a certain 100 spells from her book, from the witch's book, then she'll be safe and will be allowed to stay there. Turns out the spells are a lot harder to learn than she expected at the beginning. It should be a fun ride. I don't know. We'll see about that one. Kind of along the same retelling line, we have a book called Marvelous that comes out on February 28th. I guess you would call this a historical fairy tale retelling. This is by Molly Greeley, who wrote The Clergyman's Wife, which is on my shelves, and who wrote Eris, which I just hauled, but I haven't read either of those. Both of those are kind of retellings set in Jane Austen's world. This one is set in the 1500s in the French royal court. And it's going to be potential original story of Beauty and the Beast. So we have this young man who is shunned from society because he's extremely hairy, and a young woman whose dad sets her up to marry him, and she's not thrilled about it. So it's going to kind of be a Beauty and the Beast type of story set in the 1500s French royal court. I just think that sounds fantastic. And the cover is beautiful. Also coming out on February 28th is The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. This is by Katie Lumsden, and some of you may recognize her name because she has her own YouTube channel. And I don't follow her channel all the time, but I'm very excited about this book. I think it's set in the Victorian era. It's going to have a Gothic feel to it. It's set in 1852. Is that Victorian? I don't know. But Heartwood Hall is this estate, and it's going to have kind of a character of its own. It is said to have been cursed or kind of be haunted, or some kind of dark feelings that people have about Heartwood Hall. And we're going to follow a kind of secret love affair between a governess who gets sent there to work for the family who lives at Heartwood Hall and the gardener. But there's going to be secrets and creepiness, and the cover of this also is really beautiful. I just think this sounds delightful, and I'm happy to support a fellow booktuber. So yay for The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. I have 3 more for this list that all come out in March. The first is a middle grade by Diane Zoller, and it's called Wild Bird. This is another historical fiction middle grade. It takes place in the 14th century, and we follow a young girl who has to walk from Norway to England because she's trying to avoid the plague. So I don't know if she runs away from her family or her family dies. She's just trying to avoid getting sick with the Black Plague. I don't know. I just feel like this takes place at a time period that I haven't read very much from. And I like the idea of this adventurous girl striking out on her own, trying to avoid the Black Plague. Of course, she's going to come across some people along the way. Hopefully she doesn't get sick. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hang the Moon comes out on March 28th, and this is by Jeanette Walls, who wrote The Glass Castle. So I feel like this is going to be a little bit more literary. It appealed to me because, number one, it's Jeanette Walls, and I really liked The Glass Castle and her writing in there. Number two, it takes place in Virginia, so that appeals to me because that's where I'm currently living. And then it's historical fiction about a female bootlegger. There's a young girl who had left her family, I think, and then comes back to her family, but isn't quite fitting in with the rest of them. And she becomes a bootlegger during Prohibition era. So that sounds like a wild ride. And I like finding historical books that are not just World War II. I do like a World War II historical fiction, but I like others as well. So I feel like that gives me some variety. Prohibition era, I don't know that I've read anything about that or set during that time in a while. So that sounds like it could be a good one. And finally, we have a first in a new mystery series, a historical mystery series. It's called Murder in Postscript. It's by Mary Winters. It comes out on March 28th. And we follow a Victorian countess who is secretly the author of an advice column in their kind of penny saver. They're like penny paper. I forget what they called it, but she answers questions in this advice column. And one person writes in about this mystery, this person who was murdered or how to hide the body or something. Somebody writes in about this murder, and she gets wrapped up in this mystery. Her best friend is a marquess, and I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of love between the two of them at some point, but he gets wrapped up in helping her as well solve this mystery. So that just sounds like a really fun historical mystery. So I added it to the list. Murder in Postscript. So those are the 12 books that I'm really looking forward to in January through March. I am sure there are others. Try to keep it at numbers that I might possibly read most of them before the end of the year. But those are ones that I'm really looking forward to. I would love to hear from you if you know of any other books coming out at the beginning of the year in the winter that sound good to you. If any of these sound good, I would love to chat with you about that in the comments below. I always love talking to you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.